Ohio State and Oregon get all of the deference when it comes to who is going to be top in the conference. Now, it's not like Michigan's any slouch as number 8 in the coaches poll and number 9 in the AP Top 25. Yet, those are the two teams expected to contend for a championship, and very few are giving Michigan a chance to win everything when it comes to the conference. However, Joel Klatt gave kind of a little bit of a here's why Michigan can. And it's why I believe Michigan shouldn't be counted out. We're going to talk about that on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Thursday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. If you're watching on video, a little sweaty because Zuri and I got done with our walk, and I've got to rush off after this, get ready and rush off after this to Ann Arbor to be your man on the ground. Anyhow, at the tail end, we're going to talk about the position group I have the most confidence in and the one I have the least confidence in. But before we get to all of that, I want to talk about Joel Klatt and some of the things that he had to say. Hopefully we'll get to ask him in a few weeks a little bit more. He said that he'll definitely come on the show, but we just, again, obviously, if you haven't followed along to the show for years, Joel has been I don't want to say regular, as it makes it sound like he comes on all the time, but we'd get him once or twice a year, generally. But he had this to say. I want to read you some of his quotes and then react to it. So he had said that about Oregon and Ohio State. Like they're the two that are expected to be at the top. They're the two who are expected to be in Indianapolis. And then he says, if you're a Michigan fan listening to this, you probably slapped the dashboard, threw something down, spit out your drink, and you're like, what do you mean? Who's the threat? We're the defending national champions. Who's the threats to the team we just beat 3 times? I get it. I get that. And fair enough, that's why Michigan is the biggest threat to those top 2. I do believe that there is somewhat a consensus that Ohio State and Oregon are at the top, and that Michigan, because of everything that they lost, is going to have to be somewhat of an underdog this year. I think that that's fair. I think it's a fair sentiment. And yet, if you're a Michigan fan or certainly inside of that building, you're sitting there thinking to yourself, what is this guy talking about? We just went 15-0. We did not change our culture. We're building from within. We're developing from within like we have this entire time. The last 3 years has been magical in Ann Arbor, and that's why they're continuing, and that's why they will be the biggest threat to Ohio State or Oregon. We're going to continue with his quote, but I want to react to what we just heard. I don't want to just spend the whole time reading a block quote. I think that that's right. And I had a thought as I was kind of going through that. Like the way college football tends to work is very reactionary, but for whatever reason, I don't know if it's because of the Connor Stallions of it all, if it's whatever, it's not really necessarily followed Michigan. Now, last year, yes, Michigan was at least expected to win the conference, and it did exactly that. That made all the sense in the world, given just how much elder leadership and returning experience that Michigan had. But there certainly have been times where, after 2021, it was like, yeah, like that was an accident. After 2022, yeah, that was an accident, but now maybe we kind of believe it. 2023 happens, and it's like, okay, cool. Good thing that's over. But when you think of like how this tends to work, right? Like everyone looks at Texas and says 100% top team. And it makes sense because they made the college football playoff last year. Now they have a quarterback coming back, but they lost a lot of their top players as well. Xavier Worthy, their running back from last year, apparently both of the primary running backs from this year, some defensive pieces and so on and so forth. And no one's looking at that as insurmountable. Obviously, they've had good recruiting. They've gotten in some good transfers, but it's a 1-year trend, right? Yeah, when it always stands to reason, like, okay, well, that 1-year trend is going to turn into 2, is going to turn into 3 until otherwise it goes the other way. And that's not the only team. Florida State, they won a national championship. They went to the college football playoff in the first year. And then, everyone thought Florida State. Even with a down year or 2 down years, right? You get to 2016, they're playing a New Year's Six Bowl. And then the idea is they're just going to continue rolling. And then Clemson comes along starting in 2015, and they become the new hotness. And it's like, well, Florida State, So sayonara. But generally, it comes with that other team necessarily coming along. Oregon has been to the college football playoff, but if memory serves, it's been a minute since they've been in it. You know, they've kind of been trying to get back to that level. It obviously looks roster-wise like a team that it could be that. But at the same time, like Ohio State made it 2 years ago, despite having lost to Michigan, loses to Georgia right at the stroke of midnight. And then made it a couple years beforehand, has been to the national championship game under Ryan Day, but has not won it. So, I mean, I understand why they're sticking around, but generally, you know, when trends happen in college football, people tend to overreact and say that's going to continue forever. For whatever reason with Michigan, it goes the other way. All right, let's continue reading Joel Klatt here. It doesn't matter who is left because they believe they're the biggest threat. They believe they're the kings of the hill. They believe that the conference goes through them. You might see that early in the year when they play Texas. The other part of this is not just self-belief, which kind of lives in the air, but it's also the tangible aspect of what Michigan does on the field, and that's they put you in a bind. They just do. They play such a different style of football than most teams, and I think this year will be even leaned into more because they don't have J.J. McCarthy to throw the ball as much as they did or as efficiently as they did a year ago. They're going to lean into, as their coach Sharon Moore puts it, smash ball. And that's going to be difficult for each of these teams. It's going to be difficult for Ohio State. It's going to be difficult for Oregon. It's going to be difficult for Texas. It's going to be difficult for USC because it's not what other teams do. Let's react to that real quick. You can't underestimate why Michigan's brand of football has worked in the last couple of years and why it didn't necessarily do so kind of in the early going of Jim Harbaugh. First couple of years, it took people by storm and it worked. But then the next couple of years, he didn't really, I mean, even in the, from 2015 through 2020, Jim Harbaugh never really had the same components that he had in San Francisco or at Stanford, where he had just absolutely bruising, punishing lines on both sides of the ball. That's what Sharon Moore has still this year. And that's not what you see across college football all too often. Is those punishing line of scrimmages. And the more I kind of think about a lot of this stuff, you think about Georgia and what it has been. Even with, like, people want to talk about the quarterback and all of that. And Stetson Bennett ended up being really good, but he wasn't even, if memory serves, he wasn't even a scholarship player, right? He was like a walk-on. He certainly wasn't a highly touted recruit. Even when they had Justin Fields, he was languishing on the bench behind Jake Fromm. And they weren't winning championships yet, but they were in line to do so. Stetson Bennett comes around, and really it was kind of like they had just the best line play. I want to continue this thought. We're gonna do a one segment, most confident, least confident position. And we're going to continue along these lines of thought. We're going to do that here in just a moment. But before we do, listen, summer is winding down, but it is still going. You're going to need to get outside. You want to go to the ballpark. The best way you can do that is to go through Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. So many things I like about it. The views from your seat is my favorite option because you can see exactly what you're going to be seeing. No obstructed views or anything like that if you were smart about it. But also the lowest price guarantee, because if you find a different price better somewhere else, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, you redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, I'm not done with this topic. I'm not done with all of what we've been kind of going on about here. So I was last talking about Georgia and 2021, right? They just had punishing lines. And as much as we were all going into that game saying maybe they've got a chance, Joe Moore Award winner, best offensive line in football. Then you looked at the defensive line and you looked at Jordan Davis and you said, yeah, this is going to be a long day. Michigan has kind of that same issue, like not issue, the opposite. The same kind of deal as Georgia is they've got two, not necessarily stature-wise Jordan Davises, but I'm looking stuff up. I can't do two things at once. Not necessarily two Jordan Davises, but they've got two guys of that caliber of play, right? So Jordan Davis is 6'6", 336 pounds. Absolute behemoth. Kenneth Grant, I know, is not that. I know he's about that in overall stature. But looking at what he came in at with the latest, is he not listed on my thing here? I definitely miscategorized him on my spreadsheet. Where is he? All right. I have him as an OL for some reason. I don't know how that happened. But Kenneth Grant is 6'3", 339. Weighs more, but he's shorter. That's fine, right? Michigan's got between Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham, they have those types of linemen that Georgia had. Michigan is built an awful lot like Georgia. And there's a reason why Georgia keeps winning kind of regardless of who you put back there. They're not winning because they have the best quarterback in the country. They're not winning because they have the best wide receiving core in the country. They're not winning because they've just got skill position guys that are going nuts. What they've done is had the best line on either side of the ball and insane tight end play. Guess what Michigan has? Insane lines on both ends and the best tight end in the country. And yet people don't really seem to look at Michigan as being in that same caliber. Michigan's got speed all over the field despite the size. But everyone loves to look at the quarterbacks and the wide receivers, even though for the most part, it is not those types of teams that are out there getting in track meets that are winning the championship. Georgia won, 2 in a row? Michigan won 1. Before Georgia, it was Alabama. I don't understand Alabama had a bit of that. Obviously, they had Mac Jones and Devontae Smith and, all of these guys. But they still had the line play on either side of the ball. I think Oregon probably does have that. But I don't know that Ohio State does. I think defensive line might be in the better shape. But I don't know that their defensive line even holds up against Michigan's offensive line. I think it's a very good defensive line. I think you think of it kind of in the same kind of terms as maybe like Michigan 2017 or 2018. Like you can shut them down, not as much as like Michigan 2016, where you couldn't shut them down. Like I think you can shut them down to some degree, but it takes a special offensive line to do it. We're going to continue with the Joe Klatt stuff here, because he's got a couple more paragraphs I want to get to. And the next one feeds into what I was just saying. This has really been the secret of their toughness at the line of scrimmage over the course of the last few years. That's why they're the biggest threat. They're going to be excellent on defense, very tough, very physical. The interior of that defensive line, you're not going to be able to move them. And I understand Ohio State has a great secondary. I understand that Ohio State has great edge rushers, but does that matter? If Michigan can run it 55 times, maybe not. That's also true. If the strength of Ohio State is Caleb Downs and Denzel Burke, great. We've seen Michigan say, we're not really going to pass it against you that much. We're just going to run it because we can. See, for the last 3 years, they said, good, great for you, or great, good for you. Look at all the skill on the outside offensively, even defensively. And they said, come on in here into a phone booth and see if you can win a fist fight. And they've won the fist fight. They have won the fist fight. That's 100% it. Styles make fights. And Ohio State might be starting to kind of angle its style more towards what Michigan presents. But at the same time, Michigan has only gotten better at what Michigan does. Ohio State's still learning that. Now, it was a close game last year, unlike the 2 previous years, but Michigan was facing a lot of inner turmoil with Jim Harbaugh and his suspension. If Michigan's a bit more grounded, a little bit more solidified under Sharon Moore, he's not an interim coach anymore. I think that bodes really well for the Wolverines this upcoming year. Road game, that's going to be tough, but Michigan, a lot of these players know what it takes to go to Columbus and win. Not one player outside of Joey Velasquez knows at Ohio State what it's like to beat Michigan. Or not beat Michigan. Joey Velasquez doesn't know what it's like to beat Michigan, but he knows what it's like to not lose in the rivalry because he hasn't done it since before COVID year. 2019, I believe, was his class. No one at Ohio State knows what it's like to win this rivalry game. That counts for something as well. As far as Oregon, I'm not as concerned about them at the moment. I have them penciled in as a loss regardless because I think it's the most complete team in college football, personally. Continuing with Joel Klatt. They believe they're the king of the mountain. That's why they're the biggest threat. They believe it. You can walk around anywhere else in the country and everyone else in the country, and people are talking about Ohio State. People are talking about Oregon. In Ann Arbor, you walk into the building at Michigan, nothing's changed. And it's the damnedest thing I've ever seen in my life. Go there for the spring game and walking around, I'm like, man, look at all the new head coach, new coordinator, new strength coach, new quarterback, all the new. And David Edwards look at me like, what do you mean new? Nothing's new. Nothing's changed. We are Michigan. That's consistency and that's culture. What do people always talk about when it comes to Iowa? People talk about Iowa and say, look, like, okay, their offense might be bad. Their defense is phenomenal. And why is their defense phenomenal, even though they're not necessarily getting 5 stars or even 4 stars? It's because they know who they are. They know what they do. They have an identity and they stick to the identity. Guess what Michigan is? Michigan has an identity and it sticks to the identity. So I do think people are underestimating Michigan, but I guess we'll see. We might not know right away because they could absolutely lose in week 2 against Texas. Texas went into Tuscaloosa last year and won. Didn't win the whole thing. You never know. All right, let's talk about the position group I have the most confidence in and the least confidence in here in just a moment. I have razor-thin time margins today, unfortunately, in order to kind of get everything done in the timely fashion that I want to. Nonetheless, there is... So I say that to say that this might not go like 8 minutes, this segment. This might go about 5-6 minutes. That's what I'm going to say. I think that's about all I can afford at the moment. Anyway, so to finish out here, instead of doing like a whole like position group I'm most confident in all the way down and like ranking them by confidence level, we've done that show this offseason. It's a little harder to kind of get into to some degree because there's just a lot of places where I really don't know a lot about. And I know that we can say like, oh, we think we know, but with the way that we're hearing the things we're thinking, neither of those things were sentences, in English at least. The things that we've been hearing out of fall camp kind of changes maybe some of the calculus to it. So in terms of where I think I'm the most confident a position group can perform, and here's the interesting thing about it. Both the place that I'm most confident and least confident comes in the secondary at this juncture because I've gained confidence in both. We have no idea who the quarterback's going to be, but just like the things we're hearing about what the quarterbacks are doing in fall camp make me confident. Suddenly I went from being a very big skeptic when it came to the wide receivers. Now I look at the wide receivers and say, I feel like that is being very underrated, and we've broken down why in previous shows, so just access those if you haven't already. But the place where I'm most confident is safety, and the place where I'm least confident is corner, except for Will Johnson. Cornerback isn't quite like an offensive line where you're only as strong as your weakest member, but certainly it can be a part of it, because if you have a weak person opposite Will Johnson, they can be exploited. Now, I'm not saying that they have weakness opposite Will Johnson, or if Will Johnson isn't on the field. They don't, but I have more questions about Jair Hill, Amir Hall, and Ricky Johnson, Keyshawn Harris, Jaden McBurrows are the ones that were all listed by Sharon Moore yesterday. Would love Cody Jones and Miles Pollard to join the fray there, or Josiah Edmond by the end of the year. I'm not sure that is where they're at the moment. So why do I say that they're the place I'm the least confident? Because with Jair Hill, we haven't seen him a lot. Year 2, he's on TikTok in a sling. Sounds like he's okay. But, he's out there dancing in a sling. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with being in a sling. I've had bad muscle soreness. Sometimes I overwork my biceps back when I weightlifted all the time. And I'd get kind of lock arm. And I'd put myself in a sling for the day. And, I'd go back to the gym later that night and I'd be fine. And, while I was weightlifting, and then I put myself back in a sling. I don't think there's necessarily a ton to be concerned, because there's a lot of reasons why someone could be in a sling. But especially with all the talk of the wide receivers they're amazing. How much does that fall on the corners? Because there is an inverse to that in when it comes to it. Now, the good news is Michigan's got the guys up front that can create that pass rush if there is any weakness. A lot of people love to hate on Channing Stribling. I don't. But you could say he was a beneficiary in 2016 by having a very strong defensive front ahead of him. Because when Jordan Lewis wasn't able to play, he and Jeremy Clark held it down early in the season. Yet he didn't end up getting drafted. Not to use that against him here, but he didn't end up getting drafted. The good news is next to those corners is you've got all of these safeties. I'll include nickel in here and say Zeke Berry, who looked great in the spring game, looked great in week 1 last year, but we haven't really seen him outside of that. Safety is such it's so deep now that you're going to miss Rod Moore because he's probably one of the best safeties in the country. Yet you don't miss him because Makari Page and Quentin Johnson have been out there a lot. And you can count on those guys. If you need to move Zeke Berry and then rotate him into safety and rotate Jade McBurrows to nickel, you still feel kind of fine about that. Because you've seen it before to some degree. Maybe not at once, but you've seen it before. But with the additions of Jaden Mangum and Wes Walker, who we were going to meet today, Wes Walker that is, and Brandon Hillman, because remember, there was a point in time when we were talking Makari Page and Brandon Hillman, and otherwise, good luck. It's easily the deepest room because any combination of those guys, you're like, let's go. Good place, good things. So I think that actually helps out the weakness to some degree. And when I say weakness, it's not really a weakness. It's more, we don't know. Least confidence. Because you have that help, that safety. You're going to see a lot more heavy passing teams this year than you have before. And certainly there's going to be moments where it's going to look like Michigan's got. Remember, when you're facing a Washington, an Ohio State, this year, a Texas and an Oregon, there's going to be times where you're going to give up big plays. It's, do you keep them from the end zone? And do you finish? Do you do like you have done against Ohio State for the most part the last couple of years? Or do you end up being like you were against TCU and getting Max Duggan halfway down before he lobs a touchdown? Good news is what's up front, as we talked about, is Georgia 2021 caliber. At least on paper it is. All right, that's going to do it for us today. We're going to be back tomorrow to talk about the players and stuff like that. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. Peace.